What would you think if you heard speeches on topics like the Cabbage Patch Kids, or you should get a mobile phone, or how you can start a pen pal via airmail? Or if maybe I referenced examples from TV shows like Cheers or The Facts of Life or Cosby. Confused? Well, yeah, you probably would be. Well, why? Because while these worked when I first started teaching in the 1980s, they don't work now. And I know that and have updated my examples because I understand today's lesson, which is all about audience analysis. Audience analysis is the very first thing you do when you've been asked to give a speech. The purpose of your speech is not just to give information and hope for the best. Your purpose is to get the audience to remember the information or to get them to change their mind or maybe to take action. To do this, you have to have a really, really good understanding of who they are, what they know, and what they value. This is hands down, without exception, the most important aspect of preparing a speech. So let's take a look at it. Audience analysis is the process that a speaker goes through of gathering and analyzing information about their audience. The psychology of the audience, the demographics, the motivations, that type of thing. You do this to help you narrow and focus your topic and to identify support material that's relevant to the audience and understandable to the audience. Remember, your speech needs to be meaningful to them. It's not about you just speaking words and giving information. You have to connect that material to the audience. So what we're going to look at next are 5 questions that you should ask yourself when you're preparing your speech. And what I'm going to do is give you a lot of examples from my own student speeches. So we're going to take the material from the textbook and kind of apply it in this video. And what are those questions? Well, first you need to know who they are, why they're there, what they know, what their attitudes are, and what they're interested in. So let's take a look at each one of these questions that you need to ask yourself. First question is, who is your audience? And this is a lot about demographics, so population data like age, ethnic or cultural background, socioeconomic status like income, occupation, education. It's also religion, political affiliation, gender, and group affiliations like clubs and organizations, things like that that they belong to. Understanding your demographics can help you think about the angle you should take with your topic. And I have to use demographics all the time when I teach because I get older every year and my students pretty much stay the same age. So like between the ages of 18 and 22. So every year I get closer to retirement and my students just keep getting younger. So I have to constantly update my content, like my examples that I use, which is really difficult for me because the age gap just keeps getting bigger. So I have to put feelers out and ask people, like ask younger people, like what are some good examples that I can use in class. I see problems with this when students talk about locations like we all know what it is. You know, we don't all live in Philadelphia, or we don't all live in Harrisburg, or are familiar with New York City, that type of thing. The other thing students do is they use examples that we can't relate to. So several years ago, I was at a conference and I went to a session on money management and investing. The speakers were all like, if you have $100,000 to invest, and I'm like, who in here has $100,000 to invest? Like, I maybe have 1,000. And I could not relate to anything that they were saying because they were all of the speakers were acting like I made 6 figures and I was not making, especially at that time, anything close to that. So you do have to make assumptions, but be very careful of your assumptions. So I live in New York, and a lot of people think because I live in New York that I love the Yankees. which I am from Michigan, so I am much more of a Tigers fan. And speaking of living in Michigan, people think that I'm a Michigan fan, and I do want to remind everyone that I went to Penn State. So in general, you really do need to think about who your audience is and ground your approach and your examples, and don't assume that everyone is the same as you. Okay, question number 2 is why? Like, why is the audience there? What do they want to walk away with? Is this event where you're speaking required, like a class? Is it voluntary? They might be resentful and angry that they have to be there, and so you're going to walk in thinking, "Oh, they're going to love me," and none of them really want to be there. I've been to a lot of presentations where I sit there and think, "Why am I here?" Content has nothing to do with me. Like, my intention is I'm going to go and learn something, but as soon as the speaker starts talking, I don't know what it has to do with me. When speakers don't really think about the why, they have a tendency to speak words, like literally, they speak words, and they just give information and facts. And the why, it seems more like, and this is really unfortunate, why they're there is to let the audience know what they know about the topic and everything they know about the topic and how informed they are. So it's really dangerous to take that approach. So I encourage you to think about why your audience is there. Probably not a huge deal for this class, but for you as a professional, consider why your audience is there. Third question, what do they know? Big, 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 big deal. This goes along with the who, the first question. You really have to think a lot about how familiar your audience is with your topic. I often have students who, for example, love sports. So they want to give a speech about a sport that they love or that they play in. And that's fine, but don't approach the speech like we know what you know. I heard a speech on common fouls in basketball. It was awful, mainly because to really understand fouls, you have to have a good understanding of the sport of basketball, or an understanding of the game. And if I understand the game, I probably already understand fouls. So it really is not a good approach to take. So you can keep your topic of basketball, but you need to change how you're going to approach that particular topic. And speaking of sports, I heard a fantastic speech on the different types of baseball gloves. And this student, and I still remember his name, he was a baseball player at Mansfield. And I don't know anything about baseball, or very little, and I know even less about gloves. I've heard a few speeches on gloves. They were not very good, but I do know that different players use different gloves, but I never knew why. But his speech was so good because I did not need to understand really much of anything about baseball, because what he did is he explained how the design of the glove matched the position. And then he explained using visuals, and he explained the position and what that player typically does and why that matches the design of the glove. Excellent, excellent speech. And really, he did a fantastic job of connecting the information to what the audience knew, which was not very much. I also heard a speech. I had a basketball player talk about Isaiah Thomas, who is a player who's in the NBA. And I was just like, be careful. But what he did that was so good, and why that speech worked out so good, is he explained 3 obstacles that Isaiah Thomas had to overcome to make it in the NBA. And I do remember the speech, like, I don't know Isaiah Thomas. In fact, I'm from Michigan, so I'm thinking of another Isaiah Thomas. But I do remember that Isaiah Thomas is like my height, so 5'9", which is really unusual for an NBA player. I heard that speech probably 3 or 4 years ago, and I still remember that. So there were there was no prerequisite knowledge that anyone needed to understand what he was talking about. In fact, I will tell you, there was an art major in that class, and when we got done with the speeches and we're talking about them, where I would dismiss the speaker and hang out with the 5 or 6 people who critiqued, she actually said, I don't know anything about basketball. I don't even like basketball, but that speech made me interested in learning more about Isaiah Thomas. So it doesn't mean don't give that topic, but what you have to do is think about your choice of words, your experiences, that type of thing, and understand that your audience might have, in general, a different experience than you, and you've got to make some changes. Number 4, what is their attitude towards the situation, the topic, you? Do they hate your topic? As soon as they hear it in the introduction, are they going to tune out? Do they not like you? And you might find that hard to believe. It's probably not going to happen in a class, but there are times when you might be invited to give a speech and the audience dislikes you right away. Think about, do they know more about the topic than you, or just about the same amount of information than you? So be prepared for that. Attitudes are our evaluation of people, ideas, objects, or events. And there are most enduring judgments about good and bad, and a lot of them are shaped by cultural experiences. So a few years ago, I had a student who was a Civil War reenactor, which I knew a little bit about because I taught college in Arkansas, and Civil War reenacting was really popular in Arkansas. I'd not met a lot of students at Mansfield who did Civil War reenacting, but he did. He thought it was really cool, and he spent a lot of money doing these Civil War reenactment battles. But I want you to think about that. It is great to think the Civil War is great, especially if you're white, and this goes along with the WHO, the Civil War was a horrible period of history for the ancestors of some of your classmates. And speaking, I mentioned Arkansas. I can clearly remember when a student in one of my classes in Arkansas was talking about how great the United States was in the pre-Civil War period. And one of his classmates was like, not for everyone. And I'm like, yeah, not for everyone. So really think about your own biases, think about your attitudes, and make sure it does not cloud your ability to gauge the attitudes and of your audience. So really, really consider their attitude. And finally, number 5, think about the interests of your audience. So your speech topic might be great for you, but your approach might be wrong. The authors give some really good tips on how to work with different audiences, so I encourage you to look at that. Not a huge deal for this class because we have a lot of similarities, but when you become a professional, think about this. Does your topic and approach interest only a small part of your audience? So I had a student give, he was very much into the Catholic faith, and I was raised Episcopal, which is similar to Catholicism, and I taught it to Catholic universities. But bottom line, I myself am not a religious person, and I don't really get the Catholic faith at all. It's not something that I'm all that familiar with. Oh my gosh, he was throwing around words, and no one really knew what he was talking about. And it wasn't like superficial Catholicism. I mean, you really had to have a deep understanding of it to make sense of what he was talking about. So just because you are really into it doesn't mean everyone else has. On a lighter note, I hear a lot of speeches on fishing, which is no surprises considering we have a phenomenal fisheries program. I don't know that much about fishing, but I do hear speeches on them, like I said. I grew up in Michigan on Lake Huron, so I know some things, but I did hear a speech on the 3 common fish in the state of Pennsylvania. It was fantastic, mainly because he made it interesting to all of this, he talked about their personalities, and I'm like, what, fish have personality? Like I had no idea. And he got into why fish are attracted to and live in certain streams and rivers and where they live. And it was really, really interesting. And he referenced rivers that we would all be familiar with. And this is opposed to a speech I heard on fishing recently where the student basically, it was awful, explained every single piece of an equipment an angler uses. Like every piece of equipment, every piece. It was not like innovative pieces of equipment or innovative equipment. No, it was the poles and then all the different poles that you can use, the bait, the lure, everything. And here I just want to tell you, I don't fish and I don't care. So if you're going to give a speech on fishing, approach it with something that I don't have to understand fishing and I don't have to have an interest in it. Just like curious stuff, like cool innovations or things that anglers do to catch fish. That is much more interesting and relatable to a general audience. So make sure you assess the interests of your audience and adjust accordingly. So I've spent a lot of time on this. This is one of the longer videos, but as a reminder, and I cannot emphasize this enough, audience analysis is the very first thing you do when you've been asked to give a speech. The purpose of your speech is not just to give information and hope for the best. Your purpose is to get the audience to remember something or to get them to change their mind or to act. So to do that, you have to know who they are, what they know, and what they value, and you do that through audience analysis. So stay tuned for more great content, and don't forget, subscribe so you don't miss a thing.